I realized something about my kids after decades of neglect, entitlement, and forgotten birthdays. They didn't respect me. They didn't appreciate me. And I knew the perfect way to make them understand, without yelling, without arguing, was to make them think I was gone. I'm Sofia Alvarez. I've lived in Seattle for most of my adult life, working hard to provide for my two children, Daniela and Marco, after my husband passed. I was a nurse by trade and worked nights as a cleaner to make ends meet. Daniela, 39, is sharp and ambitious but dismissive. She rarely called unless she needed something. Marco, 32, is charming but selfish, always assuming I'd be available to help or babysit grandchildren at a moment's notice. For years, they ignored my birthdays, skipped holidays, and complained about every inconvenience I faced. I realized words wouldn't work anymore. They never did. But fear gets people's attention instantly. And I had just the plan. I spent weeks crafting the text message. It had to be short, believable, and dramatic enough to trigger panic, but vague enough to leave them guessing. Finally, I typed it out. Feeling unwell today. Might not make it through the week. I hit send and waited. Within minutes, Daniela called, voice trembling. "Mom, what do you mean? Are you at the hospital?" Marco texted nonstop. "Mom, please tell me you're okay. I'm coming right now." Let the phone ring a few times before answering. I coughed softly into the receiver, pretending weakness. The panic in their voices was intoxicating. For once, they weren't taking me for granted. They were terrified. I maintained the charade with subtle details. A weak voice over the phone, occasional coughs or moans, casual mentions of doctors saying I should rest. Daniela immediately canceled a client meeting and texted her boss she needed to attend to family emergencies. Marco rearranged his schedule, calling friends and colleagues to say he needed to fly to Seattle immediately. I sat back in my recliner, sipping tea, savoring every reaction. Their panic was proof that my plan was working. For decades, they assumed I would be quietly available, silently enduring their neglect. Now, for the first time, they felt powerless, anxious, and scared. By the evening, Daniela and Marco were scrambling, booking flights, coordinating hotels, calling friends and family to ask questions. Social media posts popped up, asking if I was okay. Mutual acquaintances were texting frantic messages. I smiled, pretending to rest in bed. The chaos, fear, and anxiety, the perfect storm of emotional revenge, was only beginning. Little did they know, the real twist was coming the next day. I'll be honest, it felt wicked at first, sitting there with my tea, pretending to be frail, while my children were unraveling over me. But the truth? They had ignored me for years. No visits unless they wanted something. No calls unless it was convenient. So when Daniela asked, voice trembling, "Mom, do you want me to call an ambulance?" I just whispered, No, mija. Too expensive. I'll just rest." The silence on her end told me everything. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to say to me. She couldn't dismiss me. She couldn't talk over me. She was helpless. By morning, my phone was flooded with texts and voicemails. Marco's tone shifted from concern to guilt. "Mom, I should have been visiting more. I'm sorry. I feel horrible. I'm booking the next flight." Daniela went one step further. She began calling my neighbors, asking them to check on me, panicking when no one picked up right away. She even posted on Facebook, "Please pray for my mother. She's not doing well, and we don't know how much time she has left." The comments rolled in, neighbors, church friends, old coworkers, all sending condolences and prayers. It was surreal reading my own living obituary. And I laughed. Quietly, but I laughed. To keep the illusion alive, I staged the house. I left a half-finished bowl of soup on the counter. I scattered medicine bottles near the bedside. I left blankets tossed about like I'd been resting in misery. I even called a nurse friend from church to drop by, knowing she'd mentioned to others that I looked weak. It was the perfect theater production, and my children were the audience. Daniela texted, "Mom, I can't stop crying. Don't go yet. Please don't leave us like this." I typed back slowly, deliberately, letting the typing dots linger before sending. "We don't get to choose these things, querida. But no, I love you." I almost felt guilty watching her spiral. But then I remembered last Thanksgiving when she left me alone with a store-bought turkey and said she didn't have time for family dinner. And suddenly, the guilt evaporated. Marco, meanwhile, was making frantic calls. He reserved a rental car in Seattle, booked 2 nights at a hotel, and even emailed his boss for time off. My weak cough on the phone had been enough to undo him completely. By the end of the second day, both Daniela and Marco were in full panic mode, convinced they'd arrived to say goodbye, or worse, to arrange a funeral. And me? I was lying comfortably in my bed, with a glass of wine this time instead of tea, chuckling at the thought. Because what they didn't know was that I had already prepared the grand reveal, a twist that would leave them speechless, humiliated, and hopefully, finally aware of how it felt to be dismissed. The funeral they thought they were racing toward? Oh. It was coming, but it wouldn't be mine. I heard the car before I saw them. Marco's heavy SUV pulling into my driveway. Tires crunching on the gravel. Doors slamming. Daniela's voice, shrill with panic, cutting through the air. "Mom? Mommy." I didn't move. Not yet. I lay perfectly still on the couch, my blanket pulled up, my eyes half shut, the picture of fragility. The living room smelled of the soup I'd reheated, just to leave on the counter. Another little detail for their guilty eyes to absorb. Daniela burst in first, keys jangling, breathless. She dropped her designer purse on the floor and knelt by my side, tears already running. "Oh God, you look terrible." Terrible? I had on my softest robe, hair brushed back neatly, a touch of foundation to make me look pale. A performance, nothing more. Behind her, Marco stood frozen. His usually cocky demeanor was gone. He looked like a child again, lips trembling, eyes wide. He whispered, almost to himself, "I should have been here. I should have been here all along. If my heart weren't hardened by years of neglect, I might have broken right there. But no, I held steady. They needed to feel this." Daniela clutched a half-empty pill bottle I'd left on the table. "Are these your heart meds? Mom, why didn't you refill them?" I sighed, weakly. "Money's tight. I didn't want to bother you." Her face crumpled. She knew. She knew how many times I'd hinted at struggling financially, only for her to say she was too busy to help. Now, with a bottle in her hand, she couldn't deny it. Marco's eyes scanned the room. The unwashed dishes in the sink, the dusty mantle, the blanket tossed like I hadn't moved in days. It was all intentional. Evidence. Proof of their absence. Proof of their neglect. Daniela started pacing. "We have to take her to the hospital. Right now. She needs tests. She needs care." Marco shook his head. "She doesn't look strong enough to move." Their panic was delicious. For years, I'd been invisible in their world, a background character they visited when it suited them. Now, I was the centerpiece. I whispered, just loud enough. "No hospital. Just, if it's my time, let me go at home." Daniela sobbed. Marco clenched his fists. I could see the guilt gnawing at them, like rats in the dark. And then came the spark that would set the fire. Marco pulled out his phone, voice breaking. "If she doesn't make it through the night, we'll need to call the funeral home." Funeral home. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I closed my eyes, hiding the smirk tugging at my lips, because he didn't know they were walking straight into my trap. The funeral wasn't just an idea anymore. It was already in motion. They just didn't know it would be one they would never forget. The night dragged on. Daniela insisted on sleeping on the floor beside my bed, her head resting against the mattress, like she was a little girl again. Marco stayed in the recliner, his arms crossed but his eyes restless, darting toward me every few minutes, like I might vanish at any second. It was almost funny how quickly they transformed from absent children to desperate caretakers. But I kept my act steady. Every cough, every labored breath, every glass of water sipped with trembling hands, it all pulled them further into my play. By sunrise, they looked more exhausted than me. Daniela whispered, "Marco, if something happens today, we need to be ready." I heard the words, but pretended to drift in and out of sleep. Marco rubbed his temples. "I'll call St. Mary's. They helped when Dad passed. Maybe they'll handle arrangements here too." The air turned heavy. They weren't just worried anymore. They were preparing for my death. My children, who couldn't even show up for Christmas dinner, were suddenly scheduling my funeral. And I let them. I let them believe it. To push them deeper, I pulled out my late husband's old notebook, a worn leather journal I hadn't opened in years. Inside were scribbled notes about bills, wills, and estate matters. I handed it to Marco, my hand shaking. "Your father wanted you to look after things. I can't keep up anymore." The guilt on his face nearly undid me. He flipped through pages, eyes widening at overdue notices and letters I had tucked inside, carefully chosen, of course, to amplify their shame. Daniela leaned over his shoulder. "We failed her, Marco. We let her rot here alone." Oh, the sweetness of those words. The acknowledgement of their neglect served right back to them. The phone calls began. Daniela contacted Father Miguel at the church. "My mom isn't doing well. Would you be able to say a few words when it's time?" Marco called the funeral home. His voice cracked as he asked about modest services, saying, "She deserves something dignified, even if she didn't have much." I lay there, biting my lip to keep from smiling. The stage was being built, the actors playing their roles perfectly, and they didn't even know I was the director. That evening, as Daniela sat by my side holding my hand, she whispered, "Don't go yet, Mom. I promise. We'll make things right. Just give us more time." I let a tear slip down my cheek, not real sorrow, but part of the act. And in a weak, quivering voice, I said, "Time runs out for everyone, querida, and mine is almost gone." The room fell into silence. Marco stared at me like I was already halfway to the grave. Daniela's sobs filled the air. And as I closed my eyes, pretending to drift toward death, I knew one thing for certain. By the end of this, they'd be standing at a funeral, but it wouldn't be mine. It was surreal, listening to my own children plan my death while I sat in the next room, sipping chamomile tea. I heard Daniela at the dining table, her laptop open, typing furiously. Marco paced the kitchen with his phone glued to his ear. To them, I was fading. To me, I was thriving, alive with more energy than I'd felt in years. They had no idea the script they were reading from was one I had written. Daniela's voice wavered as she read aloud from the church website. "They have an opening Friday morning. We can do a small service, maybe 50 people max." Marco cut in, his tone sharp, guilty. "We need to invite everyone. Mom knew half the town. We can't just skimp out." Daniela rolled her eyes, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Do you have any idea how much this costs, Marco?" She trailed off, catching herself. I knew what she was about to say. She didn't leave us money. And there it was, the greed beneath the grief. But instead of showing it, they swallowed it down, pretending their worry was about me, not their inheritance. To stoke their guilt, I planted one more seed. I left my nightstand drawer slightly open. Inside was an old envelope marked burial fund. It wasn't much, just a couple $100, but enough to send Daniela into a guilt-ridden spiral when she discovered it. "She saved this? All this time?" Daniela whispered, clutching the envelope. "God, she was preparing to die and we didn't even notice." Marco took it, his jaw tight. "We'll cover the rest. We owe her that." "Yes," I thought. "You owe me much more than that." By midweek, word had spread. My neighbors dropped off casseroles. Old friends from church left sympathy cards in the mailbox. One even called Daniela, offering to sing at the service. Every bit of it fueled the farce. The house felt like a staging ground for grief. Flowers arriving, hushed voices filling the halls, whispers about how much time I had left. And me? I lay in bed, the ailing matriarch, my phone hidden under the blanket, as I texted a trusted friend from church. "Friday morning, play along, don't say a word." She agreed without hesitation. She knew the plan. She'd been watching my children ignore me for years. On Thursday night, I overheard Marco on the phone, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Yes, Father Miguel, we'll be there. 10 o'clock. Yes, thank you. It means the world." He hung up, and for the first time, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Daniela rubbed his arm. "She'll be gone soon, Marco. At least we're doing the right thing now." I nearly laughed out loud. Gone soon? Oh no, I was just getting started. Because the funeral they thought they were arranging wasn't a goodbye. It was an ambush. Friday morning came draped in gray Seattle mist, the kind that clings to your skin and makes everything feel heavier. My children looked the part of mourners. Black suits, black dresses, eyes puffy from sleepless nights. I, on the other hand, wore my finest navy dress, pearls around my neck, and my hair curled just right. I looked alive, vibrant, radiant. And yet, as Daniela pulled tissues from her purse and Marco guided her into the church, they were convinced they were attending my funeral. The church was full. Neighbors, old co-workers, parish friends. Whispers filled the pews. She went so suddenly. She was such a kind woman. Her poor children. I stayed hidden in the side chapel with my friend Maribel, who was in on the plan. My heart pounded as Father Miguel opened the service. His voice solemn. "We gather today to honor the life of Sofia Alvarez." Hearing my name spoken in past tense sent a shiver through me. It was surreal, like eavesdropping on my own eulogy. Daniela sobbed loudly, clutching Marco's arm, and Marco bowed his head, jaw clenched, guilt radiating off him like heat. Good, I thought. Let it burn. The slideshow began. Photos Daniela had thrown together at the last minute. Childhood birthdays, my wedding, family holidays where, if you looked closely, I was always the one cooking, cleaning, holding everything together. And there it was, the proof of their neglect, hidden in plain sight. Picture after picture of me sacrificing while they smiled. Now, projected in front of everyone, it was undeniable. The congregation wept. Marco wiped his eyes. Daniela whispered, "We should have done more. We should have been better kids." As the service drew toward the closing prayer, Father Miguel nodded to me. It was time. My heart raced as Maribel opened the side door. I stepped into the aisle, heels clicking against the floor, alive and well. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman fainted in the second pew. Someone muttered, "Madre de Dios." Daniela's head jerked up. Marco's mouth fell open. They looked like they'd seen a ghost. Because to them, I was. I stopped halfway down the aisle, meeting their stunned eyes. Then, in a voice steady and strong, I said, "Imagine planning your mother's funeral while she's still breathing." The room went dead silent. Marco's hands trembled. Daniela whispered, "Mom, what is this?" I tilted my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. "This," I said, "is what it feels like to be treated like I was already gone." The gasps, the whispers, the weight of the moment, it was everything I had envisioned, and it was only the beginning. The silence was suffocating. All eyes locked on me, alive, standing tall, pearls gleaming under the church lights. Daniela's mascara streaked down her cheeks. Marco's fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. And then in a voice that filled every corner of that church, I said, "You planned my funeral before you ever planned a dinner with me." The whispers started, sharp and quick, like daggers in the pews. Daniela stumbled to her feet. "Mom, we thought you were dying. You lied to us." I stepped forward, my heels echoing like thunder. "Did I? Or did you just believe what was convenient? You ignored my calls, skipped birthdays, left me alone on holidays. I was dead to you long before today." Gasps erupted. A few heads nodded in agreement. Friends who had seen me sit alone year after year. Marco rose too, his voice shaking. This is cruel, to put us through this." I locked eyes with him. "Cruel? You want to talk about cruel? Cruel is leaving your mother to fix a leaky roof by herself at 72. Cruel is watching her struggle on scraps of retirement money while you bought new cars and vacations. Cruel is treating me like a burden instead of family." The weight of my words dropped like stones. Marco's face crumbled. Daniela's sobs turned into hiccups of shame. I turned to the congregation, my voice steady. "When my husband died, I thought my children would step up. Instead, they stepped away. Look around this room. Every person here has done more for me than my own blood." I gestured to the slideshow, still flickering behind me. Me at cookouts, family gatherings, always standing, serving, giving. "They used me up," I said, my voice breaking just enough to sting. "And when I grew tired, they left me to rot." The murmurs rose, disgust, pity, anger. Not at me, at them. Marco's head hung low. Daniela covered her face. Father Miguel cleared his throat, uncomfortable but unwilling to stop me. This wasn't just a service anymore. This was justice. I lifted my chin. So yes, I staged this. I let them think I was dying, because I wanted them to feel what I felt for years, invisible, forgotten, already gone. Daniela's hand shook as she whispered, "Mom, please, don't do this here." But I did. I looked right at her. "Oh no, mija. This is exactly where it needs to be done. In front of every person you wanted to impress with crocodile tears." A ripple of gasps and nods moved through the pews. I walked slowly down the aisle, the room parting around me, my words laced with fire and finality. "You had your funeral. You cried your tears. You made your promises. Now hear this. I am alive, and I am done." I stopped at the doors of the church, turning one last time to face them. "You wanted me buried. Fine. From this moment on, consider me dead to you." The church fell into stunned silence as I walked out, the click of my heels echoing like a gavel slamming shut. The air outside was crisp clean. The mist had lifted, and sunlight broke through the gray. Behind me, I knew Daniela and Marco sat in the pews, humiliated, stripped bare in front of the community they had tried to fool. And me? I felt lighter than I had in decades, because my funeral had already happened, and I'd walked away from it alive, finally free of them. I walked home from the church slower than usual. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, calm, like a clock that had been wound back into rhythm. The neighborhood was quiet. Kids were on their bikes. Someone was barbecuing down the street. The world looked normal. But inside me, something seismic had shifted. I had just buried my children, not in the ground, in my heart, and I felt no regret. People will ask, why go that far? Why stage a funeral? Why humiliate them so publicly? Because private words hadn't worked. I'd begged them to call, pleaded with them to visit. I'd cried into a phone line that always went to voicemail. They only showed up for appearances, for events, for optics, for what others might think. So I gave them the one event no one could ignore: A funeral. It was the only way to hold a mirror up to their indifference. As I sat on my porch that evening, I thought about the years I'd wasted waiting. Waiting for Daniela to bring the grandkids over. Waiting for Marco to call on Mother's Day. Waiting for someone to notice my loneliness. That wait was over now. Strangely, I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. The performance at the church wasn't for revenge alone. It was for closure. I had given myself the funeral they had already staged in their hearts. And then, I walked out of it alive. As I sat on my porch that evening, I thought about the years I'd wasted waiting. Waiting for Daniela to bring the grandkids over. Waiting for Marco to call on Mother's Day. Waiting for someone to notice my loneliness. That wait was over now. Strangely, I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. The performance at the church wasn't for revenge alone. It was for closure. What did I gain? Peace. I wasn't waiting on them anymore. I wasn't craving their approval, their scraps of attention, their half-hearted guilt gifts. For the first time in decades, I felt free to choose my family, to lean on the friends who had stood beside me in that church with real tears, not rehearsed ones, to live for myself, not for children who had buried me long ago. I gained my own resurrection. Some say revenge poisons the soul. Maybe they're right. But sometimes, revenge is the medicine, bitter, shocking, painful, that forces you to heal. That day, I buried the fantasy of being the mother they'd one day cherish. I laid it to rest and gave it a headstone. And when I stepped into the sunlight after my funeral, I realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't that they lost me. It was that I finally found myself.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one of the left and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.